Hello, my beautiful friends, and welcome back to Alien Protocols. In this video, I'd like to dive into some very edgy science, some much more speculative than others, but some of it very grounded in real science. So many of you know that antimatter is incredibly efficient form of energy. In fact, I think it is the most powerful reaction that we know in physics. When matter and antimatter come together, they create an explosion and release an incredible amount of energy, and it's all completely efficient. It's all pure annihilation. So now that would be the most efficient power source, most efficient fuel for a craft, or the most powerful weapon simultaneously. But we'll get to that in just a second. We've discovered recently that lightning bolts can create antimatter. And how they do it is several ways. One is just in regular thunderstorms, they can emit X or Y rays, split a proton and neutron, become neutrinos and a positron, and they can either get annihilated like they would in the lower atmosphere, but, where'd you go, my little friend? Oh, maybe you're the other direction. In the lower atmosphere, closer to Earth, they form several different types of forms of antimatter. But they usually end up, again, in annihilation. They come back together and create huge annihilation. But in the upper atmosphere, something really interesting happens. Not only does the lightning happen below the clouds, but above the clouds, there's something called Sprites and Jets. And these can create the same antimatter. But because of their position in the atmosphere and the electromagnetic lines of force, they often will create a stream of antimatter. It's just a quick burst. It's not like a constant stream, but it is a long, short stream, let's say. And that would be a very nice little spot to collect some antimatter. And it could explain why oftentimes we see craft in lightning storms and at this particular altitude level. There's a lot of different types of energy and propulsion methods that you don't hear much about. Of course, there's the electromagnetic one that has the big, incredibly powerful electromagnetic fields around it. And then there's ones that are kind of like this, the Alcubierre drive, where it expands space-time behind it and compresses space-time in front of it. But dark energy could be used. Dark energy is what expands the universe, why the universe keeps expanding. And it's a way where it basically creates space, an expanding space, that creates more expanding space, that creates more expanding space. So a stream out the back of the craft would produce a very stretched out, very strong force from the rear portion of a craft, which could be a really interesting way to go. And of course, there's other methods as well, too, where they could, instead of having all this force of gravity, they could nullify gravity, possibly through electromagnetism, possibly through other means. So if gravity is completely nullified, the craft would be incredibly slippery. It could go up, down, sideways, any direction at very little power required. It's interesting, if you guys remember how the Tic Tacs, here's my terrible Tic Tac drawing, had that little L shape underneath it. If it was able to neutralize gravity, a slight bit of propulsion from one of these L shapes, if it could point any of these directions, it could literally travel any direction with just a little bit of propulsion from the little L's. So that's another way, the negative propulsion, gravity nullification. There's also a very interesting and more speculative bit of matter called neutronium. And neutronium is basically just dense, packed neutrons, like you would find in the center of a neutron star or a pulsar or a magnetar. And this incredibly dense matter could be held either in front of a craft or contained inside the craft. And the incredible dense nature of the matter would make a gravity well. And everything, especially the closer it is to this neutronium, the more force would be applied to it in terms of gravimetric force towards this gravity well. So, if it was either neutronium or something even smaller, quarkite, which is just, they say that there's quark stars, stars that are made just of quarks, are so dense. This soup from the very center would be kind of like a quark crystal, a quarkite, and a small chunk of that would be enough to pull a craft forward. And then there's even speculations of smaller bits of matter that quarks are made of, called preons and rishons, and they could do the same with that. But in the same kind of premise, but not quite as speculative in terms of known science, known matter, is micro black holes. They could have a micro black hole palisade, which would be, these are a lot further away from the craft than they would need to be. But they could, if the craft could create little tiny black holes just off of the surface. Now the problem with tiny black holes is that they evaporate incredibly quickly. So they'd have to be giving them power the whole time. But what's good about them evaporating incredibly quickly is that gives the operator control. The second you stop supplying energy, super high powered laser or other types of beams, it would evaporate. So if they could create these at will around the craft, anywhere they wanted to, it would fall that direction very quickly. So that's another incredibly speculative form of travel. There's space-time sliding, which is you could reduce the local time rate. Very incredibly speculative. There could be some way of doing a Higgs undulation, using a force that undulates down the side of the craft, using the Higgs field as a running surface, essentially. I was trying to figure out some nice term for it. But this undulation, kind of like a caterpillar, or a magnetic levitation train. There's some other very odd possibilities. If there is truly an antiverse to our universe, if they could somehow have an interaction between the two, our universe and the anti-universe, they could perhaps propel themselves. And of course there's the exploit locomotion notion, and that is when you play a video game, sometimes there are little defects in the video game, and you can go into this place in the video game and then go behind the structure of the whole video game, the whole universe. And if you move a tiny bit behind this framework, and you'll see the game is just more of a framework. And then when you come back into the game, at even a short distance, you can be, in terms of the gameplay, miles and miles and miles away from where you originally exited. I remember playing a couple of these massively multiplayer role-playing games that have huge worlds, and every so often you'll find a little exploit where you can sneak in and do all sorts of things. And that could be a possibility. But we do have some real hints, some real science that has been given to us. And that has been the fact that these craft tend to have a red-shifted light coming from them, and they're oftentimes cold. In the future, there'd be less entropy. I think that, there'd be less entropy in the future, so it might be colder. The crafts have some sort of interaction with the future. So that's something to think about. Why are these craft redshifted? And why are they appearing to be cold? It's very fascinating. One of the things about having one of these super dense objects inside your craft, like a black hole or Neutronium, is that it would be nice to be able to shut it off, so you could contain it in a field that would shut off its influence when you want to go slower. So anyway, these are just some wild, incredibly speculative notions based on a tinge of science, but it's just intended to make you think about the many different possibilities there are rather than some of the more traditional ones. But I definitely like the antimatter one. Hey, and also you guys please consider a donation to the channel. We've been doing so much stuff lately, and we would love to have your support. Much love. You could donate to PayPal, Alien Protocols, or if you have Cash App, you can always send me an email about Cash App. Or I'll even give out my phone number. You can text me, 917-446-8398. I love you guys.